In the wider Muslim world, there were many people who understood exactly what was happening. Steve Coll, a journalist, wrote in Ghost Wars, a very good book, that although Khomeini was a Shia and therefore anathema to many conservative Sunni Islamists, his audacious achievements inspired Muslims everywhere. I would argue that beyond inspiration, there was also rivalry. Iran was being transformed into the first modern jihadi state. Where was the Sunni equivalent? Not Saudi Arabia, despite the infidels as vermin sermons routinely preached in its mosques. Members of the royal family were all too comfortable in the flesh pots of the West. Not Pakistan, though increasingly Islamist, its Western-trained military officers were not about to lead a global insurrection against the infidels. With this, the seeds of a non-state, Sunni, jihadi terrorist movement were soon planted. Watered with immense oil wealth, they would sprout from the deserts as Al-Qaeda a few years later. In the fall of 1979, young followers of Khomeini seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking our diplomats hostage. Carter's response was feckless, and that was a key reason he lost his bid for re-election to Ronald Reagan. Khomeini, it appears, feared Reagan. The hostages were soon released. Reagan's most important contribution to conservative thinking on national security, I would argue, was his emphasis on, quote, peace through strength. In 1983, President Reagan explained it this way: "We know that peace is the condition under which mankind was meant to flourish. Yet peace does not exist of its own will. It depends on us, on our courage to build it and guard it and pass it on to future generations." He continued, "George Washington's words may seem hard and cold today, but history has proven him right again and again. To be prepared for war," he said, "is one of the most effective means of preserving peace." Well, to those who think strength provokes conflict, Will Rogers had his own answer, and I'm still quoting from Reagan. He said of the world heavyweight champion of his day, "I've never seen anyone insult Jack Dempsey." Again, just in case you didn't learn in history class, Will Rogers was a great American satirist, and as Reagan points out, Dempsey was a boxer and a great champion. Peace through strength appeared in the Republican Party platform in 1980, and it has appeared in every GOP platform since. Of course, this was hardly a new idea. It goes back a long way, not just to Jefferson and Adams and the Barbary Pirates, but all the way to the Roman Empire. The Latin adage, si vis pacem para bellum, means if you want peace, prepare for war. Reagan said this in other ways as well. For example, in 1984, he said, "History teaches that wars begin when governments believe the price of aggression is cheap." He also said, "There is no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there is only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender." One of Reagan's closest advisors was Gene Kirkpatrick, whom I had the privilege to know and whose guidance was critical to me in the establishment of the national security think tank I run today, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. As Reagan's ambassador to the UN and a member of President Reagan's cabinet in the 1980s, Kirkpatrick was also concerned about the spread of communism, not least in Central America. A high-level State Department official claimed not to see the problem. The coming to power of Marxist governments, he says, wouldn't be perceived as a defeat if the U.S. didn't try to prevent it. President Carter actually congratulated Americans for getting over their, quote, inordinate fear of communism. In any event, Reagan implemented the peace through strength doctrine by, among other things, accelerating the arms race against the Soviet Union, whose economy was weaker actually than most analysts understood. And in December of 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, disintegrating into 15 separate countries. The Cold War was over. Now, after that, there were many conservatives and liberals alike who were only too eager for a holiday from history. 1992, Francis Fukuyama wrote The End of History and the Last Man, a book that argued that it had become apparent that the only rational way to structure government and society was as a liberal democracy, small l, small d, with guarantees of human rights and free market capitalism. Something was being ignored, despite such clues as these. In 1983, Hezbollah, Iran's overseas terrorist proxy, suicide bombed the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 U.S. Marines, more than on any other single day since the Battle of Iwo Jima. In 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed. In 1996, Americans were attacked at Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. In 1998, 2 of our embassies in Africa were suicide bombed. In 2000, the U.S. Cole was attacked. Almost no one attempted to connect these dots to understand what was happening, what sort of threat was being posed, and by whom, and what policies might most effectively defend the United States and its allies from such enemies. On September 11, 2001, 3 targets were hit by American passenger jets that had been hijacked and turned into missiles. The jets struck the Pentagon, and 2 jets brought down the World Trade Towers, and another plane aimed either at the White House or Congress crashed in Pennsylvania, thanks to brave passengers who would not allow the terrorists to accomplish their mission. Since then, it has been obvious to most conservatives that America, and what I insist on continuing to call the free world, is again engaged in a serious global conflict, one that bears many similarities to the major conflicts of the 20th century. Let me elaborate very, very briefly. The Nazis believed that race and nationality trumped all other identities, and that Aryans and Germans must rule. The communists believed that class trumped all other identities and that the proletariat must rule. The Islamists believe that religion trumps all other identities and that Muslims must rule. Now, where conservatives may disagree is over the best strategy in response. Some conservatives believe that if we stay out of what has become known as the Muslim world, we'll be left alone. Some believe American global leadership is indispensable. Some believe we should help establish democratic governance in other countries, sometimes called nation building. Some believe we should simply support the enemies of our enemies. This is the schism between the so-called interventionists and the so-called isolationists, the neoconservatives, whose intellectual leaders would include Irving Kristol and his son William Kristol, and what's sometimes called the paleoconservatives, whose intellectual leaders would include Patrick Buchanan. A year ago, President Obama campaigned for re-election, and one of his key themes was that bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive. By now, however, it should be clear that while Osama sleeps with the fishes, Al-Qaeda is alive and well. It has changed, it has evolved, it has morphed, but it is far from defeated, as vividly demonstrated by the fact that the U.S. recently had to shut down diplomatic outposts in 17 countries, all places where American intelligence believed Al-Qaeda has the capability to pose a serious threat. And the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was foiled in its attempt to blow up a restaurant in Washington, D.C. in 2011, may be within months of achieving a nuclear weapons capability. History is not over. Serious challenges and threats remain. If conservatives do not take the trouble to study and understand them and find ways to respond effectively, who will? Freedom, President Reagan said, is never more than 1 generation from extinction. He added the following to that quote: "We didn't pass freedom on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free." Today, all those who call themselves conservatives grasp that truth, and those who are serious act upon it. Thank you.